One new market that intrigued Thomas Young was a stop in the road halfway between Salt Lake City and Los Angeles. It was Las Vegas. By now, the sign painter was concentrating on being the artist with electricity instead of oil paints. He was dabbling in Las Vegas since the early 30s, but YESCO would hit the jackpot in post-war Vegas. It was the beginning of a whole new American art form, a whole new American marketing, and a whole lot of unbelievable imagination. And even a real sense of humor. Sign making would never be the same. It started on Fremont Street with the Boulder Club and the first mega sign of Las Vegas.
He made a little rough sketch, probably on a napkin or a piece of wrapping paper or something, there at the Boulder Club for Heine Stevenson, and sketched out what he envisioned.
But a napkin is small. This called for something big.
He stopped by the butcher shop, and he bought a big roll of butcher paper, white butcher paper, and a set of colored pencils and some masking tape, and went to the hotel room and taped the paper up on the wall in the El Cortez Hotel and started sketching with a colored pencil.
Ben Jones Sr. would then engineer the freestanding sign.
A big vertical sign that would say Boulder Club, and then a big marquee out in front that would span the whole 50 feet, and it's extended clear out to the curb line, right where the street and the sidewalk ended. So it was no small deal.
Ben Jones's son remembers.
The Boulder Club was called Jones's Folly. It had no visible means of support. It was all cantilevered. People would walk under it very carefully. But it was up there the last time I was down there.
Now, just like the Tribune sign in Salt Lake City, the Boulder Club sign meant Thomas would be adding another address for YESCO.
He said, Mama, if I sell this sign to Heine Stevenson, we're going to have to put a plant in Las Vegas, because he knew that it had a lot of neon, a lot of components that had to be serviced and maintained.
Now, the great thing about Las Vegas was that the next casino always wanted a bigger sign. Salespeople kind of liked that.
They were always interested in knowing how much bigger their sign was than the folks down the street. And they were always interested in having something new and creative and attractive.
So the second sign was for the Las Vegas Club. All they wanted was it to be bigger than the Boulder Club sign.
The word on Fremont Street was, I got to have a bigger one than the Boulder Club, than Heine's got down there. You got to do me a sign bigger.
I like to say this was neon signage on steroids. Bigger was always better. And in some ways, Las Vegas hasn't changed. Bigger is still better.
Oh, there was a price to pay for the bigger signs. Thomas Young wasn't one to just give money away. He asked for relief of sign inspection fees, which ranged from 10 cents to 5 cents for each 30 feet of signs. And at some point, the company even economized by selling the plant popcorn machine. As we mentioned, there was imagination. For example, there were giant shoes for horses and giant shoes for people. And not only was YESCO designing them and Ben Jones somehow engineering them, but there was the logistics of building them, not to mention the logistics of moving a giant slipper all around Las Vegas. Now, during this time, the second generation of Youngs would become part of the company. Thomas Young Sr. had a pretty standard new employee training program. You got a broom.
Here's a broom. Here's a dustpan. This is Pop Soper. You do whatever he tells you to do. Start sweeping.
In fact, Ben Jones's son, Ben Jones Jr., who would later become general manager, was also hired under Thomas Young's same training program at the Salt Lake headquarters.
Mr. Young, do you have a job I could do here? He didn't even hesitate. He didn't look up. No. So I walked over to the door and was just going through the door. Come back here, young man. So I walked back over. He said, I want to tell you one thing. I never want to hear the words come out of your mouth, I guess you don't have. Again, do you understand me? Yes, sir, yes, sir.
Mike, Jeff, and I all started up on the bottom when we started working here at YESCO. When I was 16, I worked for Marge Gilson in our office, our business office. And one of the jobs I had was to be the paper shredder. But there weren't, we didn't have an automated machine. Maybe they were, I think they may have been invented, but we certainly didn't have one. So I was the paper shredder. I loaded stacks and stacks of computer printouts onto a hand truck out down the side of the building, stood on the platform next to the dumpster, and had ripped up computer records for hours on end.
Well, the stakes grew on the Nevada desert. Why not a cowboy on a horse? Or just the horseshoe? Or a cowgirl? Or a cowboy Vegas Vic? Or his cowboy cousin, Wendover Will? Well, let's start with a cowboy, the one and only Vegas Vic.
He's probably welcomed more Vegas visitors than I'll ever see in my lifetime.
And in terms of a marketing gimmick, it was brilliant. It just sort of seemed to identify the city. It really sort of made something that everybody could see and immediately say, I'm in Las Vegas, because nowhere else would you see that.
It caused newspapers to wonder. Boots 8 feet tall, arms of 1,000 pounds of steel, a 10-foot tall 10-gallon hat, a third of a mile of tubing, and a half mile of electric wires, all for $25,000. Now, what about the cowboy cousin, Wendover Will? Well, Tom Jr. talked about him 25 years ago.
It was very ambitious. It was big, it was mechanized, and for a long time, it was the largest mechanized sign anywhere.
And what about Vegas Vicky? Well, she was stripped clean to the metal by YESCO, but wow, what a future. YESCO artists are bringing her back. It's passion, because it is more than a sign, it's an American icon. But wait, we got ahead of ourselves to 2020. Let's get back to the nifty 50s.
I think very much in keeping with sort of the times of the 40s and 50s, Americans were sort of fascinated with the American West, and Las Vegas very much wanted to identify itself as sort of a Western, wild Western frontier town.
It's a fascination that's still remembered. Both UNLV Special Collections and Nevada Humanities displayed YESCO's history as a vital chapter in the coming of age in 50s Las Vegas signage. Well, in most cases, the signs outlasted the structures. They were actually more famous than the buildings. Why? Because signs are icons of an era and icons of people's memories.
The Mint sign stands out in my mind as probably one of the greatest projects to that time that we had done. It was an absolute magnificent sign.
Signs have become part of the buildings. In fact, they define the buildings.
Chief designer for Young Electric Sign Company, Ben Jones, masterminded the overall structural detail of the sign.
They became spectacles. Tourists loved to watch the signs being moved. It was just like a Las Vegas show.
Choosing probably the quietest hour of the 24 in the busy city of Las Vegas, 5 a.m., we moved the sections of the sign onto the scene.
It started from nothing over here and made a gentle arch up, and then made a gentle curve to this huge vertical that was 80 or 90 feet tall with a big starburst on top of that.
And it was another spectacle, another new standard for Las Vegas. Nothing like it in the world. That's why the next signs in the space age had to come from out of this world, somewhere in space.
You have the Stardust sign. It has its own font. It's atomic lettering. And of course, that corresponds with the atomic testing that was done just 100 miles up the road from Las Vegas.
We look back at the era now 60 and 70 years ago, and we see that America and the world has forgotten the buildings, but oh, we remember the signs.
I like to say we're the only city in the world that implodes its buildings but saves its signs. And that's exactly what we've done. And yes, the signs absolutely were more famous than the buildings.
One thing about being a good sign maker is you get emotional about these signs. All the care, the designs, and excitement, and then the sign is unplugged. And here it is. It's no longer a sign lighting up the street.
It hit us right, just like being stabbed in the heart. Yes, yes. Like the death of a friend, you know.
The Sahara, the Golden Nugget, and don't forget the wedding chapels. Again, it was not just the signs that made YESCO grow. There were the service contracts and the YESCO folks who drove around all night looking for a light bulb or two that might have burned out. It was a lot of looking.
And the horseshoe free parking vertical, the P, A, and the K, neons out.
And within hours at daybreak, red and white YESCO trucks would be out fixing those light bulbs. In the Las Vegas Neon Museum, we see spikes that were built into the signs. They were for YESCO service folks to climb around the signs and fix those bulbs or tubes. YESCO, over 100 years in the making.